Hi everyone, welcome back to my UGC NET Criminology lecture series. In this video, we are beginning Unit 4 of UGC NET Criminology, and this is one of the most important and interesting units in the entire syllabus because it focuses on criminological theories. Up until now, we have been understanding what crime is, its types, and its dimension. But from this unit onwards, we are going a step deeper. We are trying to answer a very important question. Why do people commit crime? This shift is crucial because theories help us think like criminologists. They give us frameworks to understand human behavior, not just memorize facts for the exam. Now, what makes Unit 4 especially scoring is that once you understand the logic behind each theory, you don't have to rely on rote learning. Instead, you start connecting concepts, examples, and real-life situations. And that is exactly what we are going to do in this lecture. We are not just going to study theories, we are going to understand them in a way that you can remember them easily and apply them in the exam without confusion. In today's session, we will begin with social control theories, which take a very unique and interesting approach. Instead of asking the usual question, why do people commit crime? These theories ask something completely different. They ask, why don't people commit crime? Think about it for a moment. Every single day we get opportunities to break rules, to lie, cheat, or to act in our own self-interest. Yet most people choose not to. Why is that? What stops us? Is it fear, morality, society, or something else? Social control theories argue that what keeps people away from crime is not the absence of desire, but the presence of strong bonds with society. These bonds, like family, education, career goals, and belief in rules, act like invisible controls that guide our behavior. But what happens when these controls become weak? What happens when a person feels disconnected, pressured, or influenced by others? That is where things start to change, and that is exactly what we are going to explore in detail. And to make this even more interesting and realistic, we will then move into two very important concepts, drift theory and neutralization theory, which explain how ordinary individuals, not hardened criminals, sometimes move into deviant behavior and then come back to normal life. By the end of this video, you will not only understand these theories clearly, but you will also start seeing examples of them in everyday life around you. Now let us move to one of the most interesting and realistic concepts in criminology, which is drift theory. This theory was developed by David Marsa in the 1960s, and it completely changed the way we look at criminals and deviant behavior. Before this theory, many criminologists believed that criminals were fundamentally different from normal people. They were seen as individuals who had completely rejected societal values and were permanently involved in crime. But Marsa challenged this idea and gave a much more realistic explanation of human behavior. According to drift theory, individuals are not completely good or completely bad. They are not always law abiding and they are not always criminal either. Instead, they move in between these two states. Marsa used the term drift to explain this movement. Just like a boat drifts in water depending on the direction of the current, people drift between conformity and deviance depending on situations, pressures, and opportunities. This means that most people who commit deviant acts are not committed criminals. They are ordinary individuals who temporarily move deviant behavior and then return back to their normal life. To understand this better, think about your own daily life. There may have been moments when you broke a small rule, like copying an assignment, jumping a traffic signal when no one was watching, or downloading pirated content. At that moment, you were not thinking of yourself as a criminal. You were still the same person who generally follows the rule. This is exactly what drift theory explains. It focuses on these temporary movements into deviance rather than labeling individuals permanently. Marsa also emphasized that people are usually controlled by their moral values and social norms, but these controls are not always active. There are moments when these controls become weak, and during those moments, individuals are more likely to drift into deviance. This weakening of control can happen due to various reasons such as peer pressure, emotional stress, excitement, curiosity, or even boredom. When these factors become strong, they can overpower a person's usual sense of right and wrong, leading to deviant behavior. Let's take a detailed case example to make this very clear. Imagine a college student who is generally sincere, attends classes regularly, and respects rules. However, during exam, the student feels extremely anxious and unprepared. While writing the exam, they notice that other students are cheating and not getting caught. At that moment, the pressure to perform well and the fear of failure becomes stronger than their moral values. The student declares to cheat. Now, according to traditional thinking, this student might be labeled dishonest or deviant, but drift theory gives a different perspective. It says that the student has not become a criminal, they have simply drifted into a deviant act due to a specific situation. After the exam, the same student goes back to their normal routine and continues to behave responsibly. Now let's look at another example involving peer influence. Imagine a group of teenagers hanging out together in the evening. They are bored and looking for excitement. One of them suggests vandalizing a public wall just for fun. Initially, some members of the group hesitate because they know it is wrong, but as the group starts encouraging each other, the hesitation slowly disappears. Eventually, they all participate in the act. Now, these teenagers are not habitual criminals. They are students, friends, and members of society who usually follow rules. But in that particular moment, due to group dynamics and the desire for thrill, they drifted into deviance. The next day, they may feel regret and return to their normal behavior. Drift theory is especially useful in explaining juvenile delinquency because young people are more likely to experience this kind of movement between conformity and deviance. Adolescents are in transitional change where they are not fully under parental control, but they are also not completely independent. They seek identity, freedom, and pure acceptance, which makes them more vulnerable to situational influences. This is why we often see young individuals engaging in temporary deviant acts such as minor theft, substance use, or rule breaking, and then moving back to their conventional behavior. Now let's take a slightly more real life type scenario. Imagine an employee working in a company who has always been honest and hardworking. Suddenly the company starts facing financial pressure and the employee is given unrealistic targets, fearing job loss and wanting to support their family. The employee manipulates some financial data to show better performance. This act is clearly deviant, but it does not mean that the employee is a habitual offender. It shows how a person can drift into deviance when faced with stress and pressure. Once the situation stabilizes, the same employee may return to honest behavior. Another interesting aspect of drift theory is that individuals are aware of societal norms even when they break them. Unlike earlier theories that suggested criminals reject social values, Marza argued that most individuals actually respect societal rules but temporarily set them aside. This is why they often feel guilt or regret after committing deviant acts. This feeling of guilt is important because it shows that the person is not fully committed to deviance. Let's consider one more everyday example. Imagine someone driving late at night when there is no traffic. They come across a red signal and decide to cross it, thinking it is safe. At that moment, they are breaking the rule and law, but they do not see themselves as criminals. They justify it as a practical decision. The next day, the same person may strictly follow traffic rules in a busy area. This again shows how individuals drift between rule following and rule breaking behavior depending on the situation. So, the key idea of drift theory is very simple but powerful. It tells us that crime is not always a result of deep-rooted criminal tendencies. Instead, it is often a temporary response to specific situation. People are not fixed in one category, they move between different behaviors. This makes the theory very realistic and relatable because it reflects how people actually behave in everyday life. Understanding this theory also helps us avoid labeling individuals too quickly. Instead of saying someone as a criminal for one act, we begin to understand the context and situation behind their behavior. It shifts our focus from judging individuals to understanding circumstances. And this is what makes drift theory so important for both criminology and real life. It reminds us that under certain conditions, anyone can drift into deviance, but that does not define who they are permanently. Now that we clearly understand how individuals drift between conformity and deviance, the next question becomes even more interesting. If people still know what is right and wrong, then how do they actually manage to commit these deviant acts without feeling intense guilt or stopping themselves? This is where we move to the second important concept developed by Gresham Skies and David Marsa, known as neutralization theory. Neutralization theory explains the mental process that happens before a person commits a deviant act. According to Skies and Marsa, individuals do not completely reject societal values. They still believe that rules are important and they see themselves as good people. However, before committing deviance, they use certain justification, almost like excuses, to make their behavior seem acceptable in their own mind. These justifications are called techniques of neutralization because they temporarily neutralize or switch off the person's moral control. To understand this in a very simple way, think of it like this. Before doing something wrong, people convince themselves that it is not really wrong in that situation. This mental process reduces guilt and allows them to drift into deviance comfortably. Let's go deeper into this with clear, relatable examples and case-style situations so that you can easily remember it. The first technique is denial of responsibility. Here, the individual believes that what they did was not really their fault. They shift the blame to external factors like friends, situation, or pressure. For example, imagine a student caught cheating in an exam. Instead of accepting responsibility, they say everyone was cheating, I had no choice, or my friends forced me to do it. In this case, the person is removing their own responsibility and making it seem like the situation controlled their actions. Let's look at a small case scenario. A group of college students plan to bunk classes and go for a movie. One student is hesitant but eventually joins them. Later, when questioned, the student says, they insisted a lot. I couldn't say no. Here, the individual is not seeing themselves as someone who made a wrong choice. They are seeing themselves as someone who was pushed into it. This makes it easier for them to engage in the act with. The second technique is denial of injury. In this case, the individual believes that their action did not cause any real harm because they think no one is hurt. They do not see the act as serious. For example, downloading pirated movies or software is often justified by saying it's just a copy, no one is losing anything. Similarly, someone stealing a small item from a large supermarket may think it's such a big company they won't even notice. Let's take a relatable case. Imagine an employee using office resources like printers or internet for personal work. They justify it by saying it's just a few pages, it doesn't really matter. In their mind, since the harm seems small or invisible, the act feels acceptable. This shows how denial of injury works in everyday life. The third technique is denial of the victim, where the offender believes that the victim deserved what happened. This removes sympathy and makes the act feel justified. For example, if someone cheats a person in a financial deal, they might justify it by saying he was greedy so he deserved it. Similarly, cyberbullying is often justified by saying they posted something stupid, they asked for it. Let's consider a case style example. Imagine a student who spreads rumors about another student out of jealousy. When confronted, they say she always acts superior, so she needed to be brought down. Here, the offender is not seeing themselves as wrong, they are blaming the victim and justifying their actions. The fourth technique is condemnation of the condemners, where the individual shifts attention from their own wrongdoing to the behavior of those who criticize them. In simple words, they say, "You are no better than me." For example, a person caught breaking traffic rules might say, "Even the police break rules," or "Everyone is corrupt in this system." A good example here would be someone involved in minor corruption who defends themselves by saying, "Politicians do much bigger scams. Why are you questioning me?" By attacking the credibility of those who are judging them, they reduce the pressure of guilt and make their behavior seem less serious. The fifth and the final technique is appeal to higher loyalties, which is one of the most powerful forms of justification. Here, individuals believe that they are breaking rules for a greater cause, such as loyalty to friends, family, or a group. For example, a student helping their best friend cheat in an exam might feel they are doing the right thing because they are being loyal. Let's look at a strong case example. Imagine a young man who steals money to pay for his family's medical expenses. Legally, the act is wrong, but in his mind, he justifies it by saying, "I did it for my family." Here, the personal loyalty becomes more important than societal rules. This makes the act feel morally acceptable to the individual. Now, the most important part is understanding how neutralization theory connects with drift theory. These two are not separate, they work together. Neutralization is what happens before the act, and drift is the act itself. First, the individual justifies their behavior using neutralization techniques. Once their moral resistance becomes weak, they drift into deviance. After the act, they return to normal life and continue to see themselves as law-abiding individuals. Let's combine everything into one clear, realistic scenario so that you never forget this concept. Imagine a college student who decides to cheat in exam. Before cheating, the students think everyone is doing it. So here comes denial of responsibility. Then they think it's just one exam, it won't harm anyone. Here comes denial of injury. They might even think the education system is unfair anyway. Here comes condemnation of condemners. These thoughts remove their guilt. Once they feel justified, they drift into deviance and cheat. After the exam, they go back to their normal routine and continue to see themselves as a good student. The entire process shows how natural and common these behaviors are. It also shows why these theories are so important. They do not treat criminals as completely different people. Instead, they show that under certain conditions, anyone can cross the line, justify their actions, and then return back to their normal life. So, the key takeaway from neutralization theory is that people do not simply break rules. They first prepare themselves mentally to break those rules. They create a justification that makes their action feel acceptable even if it is not. Now, before we end, here's something important I want you to think about. Have you ever told yourself it's not a big deal or everyone does it before breaking a small rule? If yes, then you have already experienced neutralization in your own life. And that is exactly why this theory is so powerful. It explains not just criminals but human behavior in general. If this explanation made the concept clear for you, make sure you don't stop here. Go back, revise once, and try to connect these ideas with real life situations around you. That's the best way to remember theories for UGC NET. And if you want more such simple, detailed, and exam-oriented explanations of criminology topics, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because in the next videos we are going to cover more important theories from Unit 4 in the same easy and engaging way. Also, don't forget forget to like the video and share it with your friends who are preparing for UGC NET Criminology. Let me know in the comments which part you found most relatable, and I'll see you in the next lecture. And don't forget to answer the practice questions given in the comments.